In the memory of millions of fans, George Harrison will always be remembered as the quiet Beatle, reserved, thoughtful, and distant from the noise and drama of fame. Yet, behind that calm exterior was a private life filled with turmoil, overlapping romances, and scandals that once shook all of Britain. In a rare conversation with Rolling Stone, Harrison spoke of a list of women who left him restless for life, an actress who drained him financially, someone seen as a factor in the Beatles' breakup, and even a lover who openly grew close with his best friend right in front of the cameras. Who was the one that the quiet Beatle resented most? And after all, what secrets still remain buried beneath those stormy relationships? 1. Chrissie Finley. Chrissie Wood, the most notorious wife swap in British rock. There are nights in music history remembered not because a song was written, but because a mistake turned everything upside down. One such night happened in the summer of 1973 in a small house on Richmond Hill, southwest London, where just a few hours were enough to create the scandal later called the most notorious wife swap in British rock. At that time, George Harrison and Pattie Boyd were at their most fragile stage as a couple. George had just finished promoting living in the material world, while Pattie was emotionally drifting away from him. The once vibrant Friar Park now felt empty and cold. Meanwhile, Ronnie Wood, guitarist of the Faces, later joining the Rolling Stones, and his wife Chrissie Finley were the couple that filled every entertainment column, bohemian loud, always surrounded by wine and music, as if nothing in life was serious enough to worry about. According to journalist Nick Kent in NME 1985, Ronnie himself invited George and Pattie over one weekend to relax. The party took place in a small bohemian-style house on Richmond Hill, where golden lamps glowed faintly in the haze of smoke and laughter echoed through the halls. The evening started off normal friends gathering wine overflowing Clapton, stopping by briefly before leaving while George, Pattie, Ronnie, and Chrissie stayed until late into the night. Photographer Garrett Mankiewicz, who happened to be there, recalled the mood slowly shifting from friendly to strange. George and Chrissie sat in a corner talking about Buddhism and travels in India, while Ronnie and Pattie laughed about art and fashion. By midnight, the music softened, and the wine had taken effect. As tiredness spread across the house, the unexpected happened. George and Chrissie left together while Ronnie and Pattie stayed behind. A silver Mercedes slipped away into the night, leaving behind whispers no one dared ask aloud. By the next morning, the story had already spread across London's art scene so fast, even George himself didn't know how. Evening Standard ran the headline "Rock's Private Game 4, Friends One Wild Night." The Sun claimed someone at the party had witnessed the two leaving together. The following day, Daily Mirror printed a photo of Harrison stepping into his car at Friar Park, captioned ambiguously, "The quiet Beatle no longer quiet." Fans were stunned, and the press went into frenzy. Radio stations like BBC Radio London debated the story, calling it the scandal-shaken artists from Soho to Chelsea. Handmade films. Harrison's company was forced to deny the rumors, but the more they denied, the further the gossip spread. Chrissie Finley, already a well-known model with blonde hair and rebellious charm, was suddenly chased by paparazzi. Melody Maker July 1973 published her photo with the caption, "The woman who led the Beatle astray." Meanwhile, Pattie Boyd disappeared from London, staying with a close friend in Chelsea for weeks. Sources said she turned to Eric Clapton for comfort, and only months later she began appearing by his side at events marking the beginning of another turbulent love story. Ronnie Wood brushed it off with humor. In a short BBC Radio 1 interview when asked about the rumors, he simply replied, "We're friends, and sometimes friends misunderstand each other." But the lightness of his words did little to calm the storm. Rolling Stone published a long commentary calling the incident the crossroad of love, rebellion, and self-destruction. The consequences lingered for years. George and Patty's marriage officially collapsed, while Chrissy and Ronnie soon separated. Within the music scene, people joked that Richmond that night rewrote the history of British rock. Patty Boyd became more than a woman. She was the muse for three of the greatest love songs of the decade. Something Layla and Wonderful Tonight. She made George fall deeply in love, drove Clapton to madness, and left the world forever curious about what really happened behind Friar Park's closed doors. He left England for a time, flying to Los Angeles in search of peace among old friends. But it was there in America's glittering yet lonely world that he met another woman not loud like Chrissy, not radiant like Patty, but mysterious and fleeting, as if stepping out of a melancholy song. 2. Charlotte Martin, the enigmatic muse behind Let It Down. In the mid-1960s, London was where every artistic dream collided. Rock, fashion, painting all blended into a free-spirited atmosphere never seen before. Amid the smoke, golden lights, and music at the Speakeasy Club, there was one unforgettable face, Charlotte Martin, a French model with fragile beauty who enchanted Britain's rock scene. Charlotte appeared in shoots by David Bailey, graced the cover of Vogue Paris, and quickly became a muse of London's artistic elite. She had been linked with Eric Clapton and Jimmy Page, but what intrigued the press most was her quiet connection with George Harrison, the quiet Beatle, whom no one expected to be caught in scandal. Their story began quietly in late 1968, just after the Beatles returned from Rishikesh, India. George was deeply immersed in meditation and spirituality, while his marriage to Patty Boyd had begun to crack. Patty was busy modeling in Milan and Paris, while George stayed in London lonely in the vast Kinfons home, his guitar echoing through sleepless nights. One winter evening at an art party hosted by collector Robert Fraser on Duke Street, George met Charlotte. She arrived in a white satin dress, her hair in a bun, a string of pearls at her neck. In the smoky, wine-scented room, she hardly needed to speak. Her smile drew every gaze. Photographer Michael Cooper recalled that Charlotte arrived with fashion friends while George came alone. They spoke of meditation, India, and unfinished songs. At the end of the night, George walked her to the door. No one knew what happened after, but from then on, Charlotte was often seen near Abbey Road Studios whenever the Beatles recorded. Technicians remembered her sitting silently in the hallway, reading or watching through the glass as George played. Melody Maker 1969 even described her as the mysterious girl outside the quiet Beatles studio. Though the article was pulled within days, rumors spread quickly. At that time, George was composing for All Things Must Pass. Those close to him said many songs from this period, especially Let It Down, carried an entirely new tone, darker, heavier, more sorrowful. Producer Phil Spector later admitted to Rolling Stone, "I don't know who he was thinking of when he wrote that, but it clearly wasn't Patty." Few knew that, as the Beatles neared their breakup, George often visited Charlotte's small South Kensington flat. Neighbors recalled a tall, slim man with long hair and a wide-brimmed hat arriving late at night and leaving at dawn, descriptions that matched George perfectly. When Let It Down was released on All Things Must Pass, 1970, critics hailed it as one of his most haunting works. But fans felt something different, lyrics that sounded like confessions filled with longing and regret. Alan Smith of New Musical Express wrote, "This is no longer the George Harrison of the Beatles, but a man torn between faith and temptation." Charlotte never confirmed the relationship. She appeared at a few artistic gatherings, then vanished from London by mid-1970. Her friend model Jenny Boyd later said Charlotte left in silence as if she had never existed. Yet traces remained. In a rare, unreleased tape, Harrison played a short piece titled For CM Beatles. Fans believed the initials stood for Charlotte Martin. Years later, close friend Klaus Voormann told BBC Radio 4 that George once spoke of Charlotte with a voice soft as the wind. Some people appear only once, but they change the way you see the world. Those fleeting words revealed the deep mark she left on him. Later, Charlotte left England, living quietly in southern France. Le Figaro once sought her for an interview in 1989, but she refused, sending only a slip of paper with the line, "I am no one's legend. I only witnessed them becoming legends." The connection between George Harrison and Charlotte Martin was never loud like Pattie Boyd, nor dramatic like Morin Starky. It was quieter, deeper, and haunting. Just like Let It Down itself, sorrowful yet beautiful, evoking the image of a man sitting with his guitar, remembering the French muse who entered his life like the first breeze of spring. 3. Pattie Boyd, the first wife in the Layla, Harrison, Clapton triangle. There are love stories that the world mistakes for fairy tales, but in truth, they become the beginning of years of heartbreak. For George Harrison, people often remember the guitar, the soulful eyes, and the warm, husky voice. But behind it all stood one woman, Pattie Boyd, who changed his life forever. It all began in the summer of 1964 on the set of A Hard Day's Night. George was only 21, world famous with the Beatles, while Pattie was a 19-year-old model with golden hair and a radiant laugh. She appeared in only one brief scene, but that day, Harrison asked for her number. Crew members recalled that George barely spoke to anyone else during filming. He just kept glancing at her and smiling. A year later, on January 21, 1966, they married at the Epsom Register office, witnessed by Paul McCartney and a few close friends. Daily Mail called it a dream wedding between the quiet Beatle and London's fashion muse. They moved into a charming house at Kinfon, Surrey, full of sunlight, music, and the scent of Indian incense. George gave Pattie a silver bracelet engraved with "To my eternal love, P." But married life between a rock star and a beauty icon was never simple. As the Beatles entered their most strained period, George immersed himself in meditation, Eastern philosophy, and endless nights recording at Abbey Road. Pattie, often lonely in the large house, turned to her artist friends for companionship. By 1968, rumors began to swirl. Alan Smith of Melody Maker hinted that George was no longer just playing guitar. At London parties, Harrison was seen with French model Charlotte Martin, who was connected to Eric Clapton and Jimmy Page. Pattie later admitted she often received mysterious midnight phone calls, silent breaths before the caller hung up. Once she found a Paris train ticket in George's pocket, the contact name written C. Martin. The gap between them grew. George became detached. Pattie felt abandoned. Everything broke apart on a cold night in early 1970 at Friar Park, the grand mansion George had just purchased. Pattie returned unexpectedly from Brighton, only to hear soft laughter in the living room. Opening the door, she found George and Morin Starky, Ringo Starr's wife, sitting together in the dark. Pattie said nothing, simply walked away. The next day, the news leaked. News of the World published Beatles' friendship and secrets behind Friar Park. George stayed silent. Ringo vanished from London for 2 weeks, and Pattie locked herself away, refusing interviews. In a letter to a friend, she wrote, "I no longer recognize the man I once loved." Then Eric Clapton, George's close friend, stepped in. Frequently visiting Friar Park to play guitar with George, Clapton had fallen for Pattie. In 1971, he sent her the first recording of Layla with the note, "I can't keep this inside anymore." When the song was released, everyone knew who it was about. BBC Radio 1 and Top of the Pops played it endlessly. The world buzzed about the Clapton, Harrison, Pattie triangle. One night, Clapton, drunk, confronted George directly at Friar Park. "I love Patty. I can't hide it anymore." George smirked and replied softly, "If you want to try, then try." This exchange was later recounted in Here Comes the Sun, the spiritual and musical journey of George Harrison. But the turmoil deepened. In 1973, at a party at Ronnie Wood's house in Richmond, dubbed by the press rock's Fateful Night, Patty disappeared with Ronnie while George was seen leaving with Chrissy Wood, Ronnie's wife. Days later, The Sun screamed the Beatles wife swap scandal. Though all denied it, the press pursued the story relentlessly, even mapping out the four people on one fateful night. After that shock, Patty left Friar Park taking only a few belongings and their wedding album. George did not stop her. He left only a handwritten note, "I hope you find the peace I could not give you." In 1977, their divorce was finalized. Patty later married Eric Clapton, while George found peace with Olivia Arias. Yet their story, from that first meeting on a film set to the legendary songs it inspired, remains unforgettable. Patty Boyd became more than a woman. She was the muse for three of the greatest love songs of the decade, Something Layla and Wonderful Tonight. She made George fall deeply in love, drove Clapton to obsession, and left the world forever curious about what really happened behind Friar Park's closed doors. 4. Yoko Ono, the only woman. George Harrison openly refused. George Harrison was usually the gentlest of the Beatles. Quiet, avoiding conflict, he rarely made enemies. Yet there was one woman who tested his patience so much that he outright refused to share a stage with her, Yoko Ono, John Lennon's wife. Some believed George and Yoko clashed while the Beatles were still together. But the real confrontation came in 1971 as George organized the Concert for Bangladesh at Madison Square Garden, New York. This was the most ambitious project of his life, a humanitarian cause and a bold statement of independence after the Beatles' breakup. While George was gathering artists, John Lennon suddenly agreed to join, thrilling fans worldwide. But within 48 hours, Lennon's team delivered a condition: Yoko must perform alongside him. To George, that was a line he would not cross. According to Rolling Stone, August 1971, planning meetings were held at Friar Park. There, George firmly told the team he would not let any source of controversy overshadow the concert's humanitarian purpose. A band member recalled his tone calm but resolute enough to silence the entire room. Years later, producer Phil Spector confirmed he witnessed Lennon leaving a meeting after hearing Yoko was refused. He told NME George stayed calm, but his eyes were icy. From that day, their friendship fractured. Lennon believed George disrespected his wife, while Yoko accused him of old-fashioned musical monopoly. On the Dick Cavett Show, Yoko remarked, "Some people say they love peace, but they can't stand women singing for it." The audience knew she was speaking about Harrison. The roots ran deeper. Since late 1968, Yoko's constant presence at Abbey Road sessions unsettled the band. She sat beside Lennon, occasionally offering opinions on harmonies or lyrics. To Harrison, who valued sacred creative space, this felt like territorial intrusion. An EMI technician recalled George once silently leaving mid-session, abandoning his guitar on the chair. That night, he phoned Ringo and said, "Only I can't stand this atmosphere anymore." Public opinion was not on Yoko's side. Melody Maker published Yoko the Fifth Beatle nobody asked for. The Guardian wrote, "George Harrison is fighting to save his music from over-experimentation." Matters worsened when Yoko and John released two versions widely criticized and damaging Lennon's public image. So, when John insisted on bringing Yoko onto the Bangladesh stage, George saw it as a test of pride. He never spoke publicly, but insiders revealed that the night before the final meeting, George sat for hours rewriting the artist list, crossing out John and Yoko, and replacing it with Bob Dylan. The next morning, news broke faster than official statements Lennon had pulled out. New York Post. The Times and Billboard splashed Lennon pulls out, a clash over Yoko. The concert went ahead on August 1, 1971. Tens of thousands filled Madison Square Garden. George led a lineup of Ringo Starr, Eric Clapton, Bob Dylan, Leon Russell, and Billy Preston. No Lennon, no Yoko. And yet, the show entered history, moving powerful, unforgettable. After the event, Yoko told BBC Radio 1, George robbed John of the chance to show compassion. At the press conference, George simply said, "I wanted people to hear music, not arguments." The conflict resurfaced in 1973 when George launched his Living in the Material World tour. Yoko sent him a proposal titled Music for World Peace, but George never replied. Days later, the Times ran Harrison Says No Again, with a photo of him leaving a Los Angeles studio. Rumors spread that Yoko even considered suing Handmade Films, George's company, claiming he borrowed from one of her experimental tracks for the Time Bandits soundtrack. Though never proven, the story dominated the summer of 1981. Despite their feud, George was among the first to arrive at Dakota Building after Lennon's tragic death in 1980. He brought white flowers, stood silently for a moment, and left. A New York Daily News photographer captured the image later, titled The Quiet Farewell. The story of George Harrison and Yoko Ono was not just personal, it was the clash of two artistic egos, one quiet and traditional, the other bold and defiant. That clash left lasting cracks in the Beatles' legacy long after the band dissolved. After it all, Harrison seemed weary of music and endless disputes. Gradually, he withdrew from the spotlight, turning toward film production through Handmade Films. But just when it seemed he had escaped scandal, another time bomb awaited him not in the studio but on a film set. 5. Madonna, the nightmare on the set of Shanghai Surprise. After years of exhaustion from the music world and emotional turmoil, George Harrison thought he had found peace in cinema. In 1978, together with Dennis O'Brien, he founded Handmade Films, a small British company that financed independent artistic projects. No one could have guessed this choice would later pull him into a true nightmare. It began in early 1985 when Harrison agreed to finance Shanghai Surprise, expected to be a romantic adventure blockbuster directed by Jim Goddard. The story, set in 1930s, Shanghai starred Hollywood's most talked-about couple at the time, Madonna and Sean Penn, newlyweds, and dubbed by the press as America's new power couple. On paper, the project had everything to succeed: a best-selling novel, as source material, classic settings, an A-list cast, and financial backing from Handmade Films, which had already supported successes like Monty Python's Life of Brian and Time Bandits. But within weeks of filming in Hong Kong, chaos took over. Journalist David Benedict of The Guardian, present on set, reported extreme heat reaching 38 degrees Celsius, and a disrupted shooting schedule because the two lead actors almost never arrived on time. Madonna, then at the peak of her music career after Like a Virgin, was criticized for diva-like behavior. Crew members said she often left mid-shoot, claiming the lighting wasn't right, while Sean Penn, infamous for his temper, frequently clashed with the director. An anonymous cameraman told The Hollywood Reporter that one day Penn smashed a halogen lamp during filming and stormed off, leaving Madonna waiting in the trailer for hours. On another occasion, supporting actress Frida Hu Chen fainted under the sun, but the schedule continued because Madonna refused to reshoot a scene until she felt the emotion was right. In England, George Harrison received troubling reports from supervisors. At first, he thought it was media exaggeration. But when Entertainment Tonight aired Trouble in Shanghai, featuring crew members complaining the two stars were driving everyone mad, he knew he had to intervene. By September 1985, Harrison flew to Hong Kong. Local papers reported his arrival at the Peninsula Hotel walking quietly beside Dennis O'Brien. One staff member recalled Harrison arriving early to set with an acoustic guitar sitting silently in a corner while preparations began. It was said he tried to calm the atmosphere by softly strumming "Here Comes the Sun." But no one laughed. The chaos didn't ease. After 1 month, the budget ballooned to nearly $12 million, double the plan. Madonna and Penn refused interviews while the press circled. Los Angeles Times declared George Harrison's film in chaos. A BBC World Service journalist quoted a crew member, "George was the only one calm enough not to scream." By early 1986, the film was finally finished. Test screenings, however, were disastrous. Audiences laughed during romantic scenes, sat silent in comedic ones, and some walked out. Variety remarked, "Madonna looks stunning, but acts as if filming a music video, while Sean Penn looks angry at the world." Shanghai Surprise officially premiered on March 7, 1986, grossing only about $2 million against production costs exceeding $17 million. Handmade films suffered heavy losses, and Harrison himself appeared on Good Morning Britain to reassure shareholders. He gently said, "We just weren't lucky this time." But behind the scenes, friends revealed he was deeply upset, even considering closing the company. A little-known detail: at the London premiere, Madonna attended, but refused to pose with Harrison. The next day, Daily Express splashed Queen of Pop snubs Beatle producer. According to a friend, George only smiled and half-joked, "Working with Madonna is tougher than touring with the Beatles." After that setback, Handmade Films weakened. Yet the Shanghai madness didn't break Harrison. It taught him the darker truth of fame. No matter how good your intentions, just a few people can ruin an entire project. Still, Madonna was not the last famous woman to bring turmoil into his life. Before the lights of Hollywood dimmed, Harrison found himself in yet another controversial connection, quieter but no less explosive. This time, not with a pop star, but with someone far closer to home. 6. Morin Starky, the woman who shook the Beatles' circle. There are Beatles backstage stories even die-hard fans rarely hear. Among them is Morin Starky, the seemingly gentle wife of drummer Ringo Starr, whose closeness with George nearly destroyed the band's friendships forever. The 1970s opened in chaos. The Beatles were collapsing, the four men barely speaking. Lennon was consumed by Yoko Ono. McCartney was fighting legal battles while George withdrew to Friar Park in Henley-on-Thames, a 19th-century mansion with rose gardens, lotus ponds, and even a stone maze. Visitors often described it as beautiful, yet cold, a house of secrets no one dared uncover. In that quiet setting, something unexpected began. Maureen frequently visited George and Patty, saying she needed company while Ringo toured. She grew close to both, sometimes even staying overnight after long parties. Friends, including Eric Clapton, later remarked that the relationship between George and Maureen became so intimate, it was puzzling within months. A former Friar Park staff member, later interviewed in the documentary Living in the Material World, recalled seeing George and Maureen walking in the garden late at night, just the two of them when everyone else was asleep. Rumors spread, though few believed the quiet Beatle would go that far. But secrets eventually surface. In her memoir, Wonderful Tonight, Patty Boyd recounted one cold March evening in 1970 when she returned home unexpectedly. The living room light was on, faint music played from the record player. Entering, she saw two figures in the corner, and in that moment, her world collapsed. She said nothing, leaving George frozen in silence. The next day, whispers hit the press. News of the World ran a half-veiled piece titled "The Quiet Beatle and the Lady Behind the Drums." No names were printed, but everyone understood. Television shows like ITV and BBC Radio discussed it relentlessly, while Daily Mirror published a special Secrets of Friar Park alongside old photos of George and Ringo smiling at a press event. Britain buzzed with scandal. The Beatles were already broken, but this seemed like the final cut. Ringo vanished from London for weeks, retreating to Monaco with Keith Moon of The Who. George locked himself in his private studio, meditating and playing guitar endlessly. Friends like Klaus Voormann and Billy Preston recalled that no one dared mention Morin's name in George's presence. Years later, members of the Bangladesh concert team revealed George was still haunted by the affair. Backstage, he once murmured, "There are mistakes you pay for your whole life." The friendship between George and Ringo seemed finished. Yet surprisingly, in April 1973, NME reported the two met again at a small party at Eric Clapton's house. No one knew what they said, but the next morning Ringo left quietly while George remained in the studio. A year later, Ringo played drums on Photograph, a song they co-wrote, a quiet gesture of reconciliation. After the scandal, Morin lived more privately. She avoided cameras, appearing only occasionally with her children at Ringo's concerts. By 1975, her marriage to Ringo ended. Magazines like People and tabloids like The Sun revived the old story, dubbing her the woman who broke the Beatles' circle, a label she reportedly despised until the end of her life. But the effects lingered. Those who knew George said he changed, more withdrawn, quieter, avoiding complicated relationships within the music world. A close friend described George wasn't the man laughing loudly in the studio anymore. It was as if he carried a new stone in his heart. Yet one tender detail survived in 1976 after George suffered a minor car accident in Oxfordshire. The first visitor was not Paddy or Olivia, but Ringo. They sat together for hours in the hospital room, speaking little, only sharing a smile when the doctor entered. Perhaps that was their silent way of forgiving. And so lie the little-known stories behind the life of George Harrison, the quiet Beatle, whose journey was shaped by love, fame, and complicated ties. Every woman who crossed his path left a mark, whether sweet or bitter. What do you think of these secrets? Which one surprised you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoy dramatic behind-the-scenes tales like this, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the next episodes exploring the real world behind the glow of music legends.